O God, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice that I will deliver the budget address on Tuesday, February 25th, 2020. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Finance. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has been tasked with transforming Aurora College into a polytechnic university. This work, which will span the 18th, 19th and 20th Legislative Assemblies, is no small task. But I'm here to tell you that we are well on our way. The transformation consists of over 200 projects and 2,000 individual tasks. In order to be successful, we need to make the right changes in the right order at the right time. To help keep things on track, the transformation is divided into 3 phases. Phase 1 is focused on strengthening the foundation of the existing college and preparing for transformation by ensuring we understand the detailed steps ahead of us. This is the phase we are currently in. Much of the work has already been completed in this area, much is underway, and there are some exciting and important projects that will be completed before the year is out. This work will ensure that the college is ready to enter Phase 2, which is where the real transformational change will begin to occur. This will require wide-ranging changes to the organizational structure of the college, a return to board governance, and changes to the Aurora College Act to ensure that governance is truly at arm's length. These changes will allow us to meet and exceed the standards that the college needs to live up to in order to complete the transformation and become recognized as a polytechnic university. This final transformation will occur in Phase 3. Transparency is the key to maintaining confidence and building trust, so in the coming weeks, I will deliver 3 minister statements describing each of the phases in detail, so that we can celebrate the successes we have already had, describe the next steps, and let everyone know how college staff, members of the Legislative Assembly, Indigenous governments, and the public will be able to contribute to the decisions that are made moving forward. We cannot do this alone, Mr. Speaker, and we're not going to try to. To keep the public better informed, we will be launching a new interactive webpage and a quarterly report to track progress and celebrate our successes. I will share these reporting tools with my colleagues and the public as they are released. Mr. Speaker, the transformation to a polytechnic university is a critical step in the economic and social development of the territory. We are not just creating an institution, we are helping create the future of the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to highlight and celebrate recipients of the 8th Annual Arctic Inspiration Prize, Northern Compass and the Decho River Journeys. The 8th Annual Arctic Inspiration Prize ceremony was held in Ottawa on February 5th. At the ceremony, Northern Compass received the grand prize of $1 million, and the Decho River Journey Project received $370,000. The Arctic Inspiration Prize recognizes and promotes the extraordinary contributions made in the gathering of Arctic knowledge in the design to celebrate and bring further awareness to organizations and their plans to implement this knowledge to real-world applications for the benefit of the Canadian Arctic and the Arctic people. I had the honor of presenting to Northern Compass with their $1 million prize in Ottawa last week, and would like to share with you an overview of their award-winning program. Northern Compass is a skilled team of educators, students, and community members from across the North. The team includes representation from a program that has been supported by the N.W.T over the years, the Northern Youth Abroad program, Northern Compass provides Northern youth with tailored support and tools that will allow them to overcome the barriers that they may face when transitioning from high school to post-secondary education. They aim to dramatically achieve amongst Northerners pursuing their education and career goals after high school, enabling them to become full participants in their communities and beyond. The project motivates youth to graduation from high school and for them to make informed decisions about their future. It also provides support and increases access to training and programs that allow Northern youth to pursue and achieve their goals. Thank you to the nominator, the Honourable David Johannessy, Minister of Education, Minister of Culture and Heritage, Minister of Language, Legislative Assembly of Nunavut. I would like to congratulate the team leader, Jim Snyder, Karen Aglukark, Lois Phillip, Rebecca Bison, who have put in so much time providing us accessibility and the relevant resources with information on funding, housing budgets, and other areas related to the Northern students' success. The Decho River Journey project was also a recipient of the Arctic Inspiration Award. This project did travel on the Mackenzie River from the Decho to the Delta and bridged the past and the present, offering a multimedia experience that explores how the past 100 years have been transformed on that river. Students have collaborated on 2 short films, one based on materials and the other based on modern-day journeys on the river. With the present-day elders, the elders will describe and explain the changes that they have seen during this lifetime. Throughout the project, the development of the interactive and educational online experience will allow students to view the films and then use this newfound knowledge to resolve real-life environmental issues of the Mackenzie River, the water, and the watershed today. Thank you to their nominators, Dr. Frank Tester, Professor of University of British Columbia, School of Social Work. Team members include Dr. Gordon Christie, Alison Dufresne, Brian Jeffrey, Terry Jeffrey, Martina Norwegian, Brenda Parley, Danielle Siegen, Sharon Snowshoe. Thank you for your work on this project and congratulations on your achievement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member for Thabacha.
Mr. Speaker, education, legacy in Fort Smith has always been a topic that has been dear to my heart. When Yellowknife was named the capital of the N.W.T. in 1967, Fort Smith was designated the education center of the N.W.T. Fort Smith's education legacy is very prominent, and we are so proud to be leading the role in this field. Many of our former leaders, including premiers, ministers, former and current members of parliament, mayors and chiefs, and others have all gone through Fort Smith to advance their education. I say this because I want to remind people of the tangible value that Fort Smith education has contributed to the development of the N.W.T. People tend to forget that Fort Smith has been the focal point for education for many years in this territory. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Auditor General's report on early childhood to grade 12 education in the N.W.T., which was tabled last week. While there was a number of troubling aspects identified in that report, I am confident that the gaps identified will be addressed by the members of the District Education Authority, the Local Education Authority, and by senior management staff in the community of Fort Smith. In order to address the education gaps in this report, proper funding must be allocated to the local and district education authorities. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I want to highlight the important work that is done at the level of the District Education Authority and all staff at our elementary and high school in Fort Smith. Every single person who works within these institutions contributes in some way to the development of our children, of our future citizens and leaders. Whether it's people at the janitorial level or the superintendent level, they all play a role in our children's development, and I want to thank them for their service, including all teachers from junior kindergarten to grade 12. Thank you for introducing Aboriginal languages and cultural-based programming with best practices to enhance the education system at all levels in Fort Smith. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, I want to acknowledge and appreciate the strong academic background that all the staff at Aurora College the Batcha campus holds. We have a very well-educated group of instructors who teach in all areas at our campus, and I would like to thank them for choosing Fort Smith as their preferred venue to teach. I want them to know that our community values their knowledge, and I certainly hope that the education system as a whole for the N.W.T. will also value their knowledge. As Aurora College transfers into a polytech university, it is vital that we recognize the strong academic background of the staff at Aurora College, the Batcha campus. Our academics and staff at Aurora College must be supported and celebrated.
Unanimous consent to conclude your statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Mr. Speaker, the staff must have a say in the development of the future transformation of the Polytechnic University. Their experience, hard work, and dedication to post-secondary education must be recognized. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that going forward into this 19th Assembly, my goal is to see the entire board of Aurora College be reinstated and to be at arm's length from the Government of the Northwest Territories. I want to see a northern-based polytech university with the highest of national standards to be developed. And yes, the headquarters should remain in Fort Smith. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabatcha. Member statements. Member statements. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm talking about closing municipal funding gap in our community governments. Mr. Speaker, 2014, the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs has conducted a municipal formula funding review. The purpose was to update community governments and funding models to ensure fair and transparent funding. Government funding models ensure that transparent funding. This is revealed in the significant funding gap between the needs of municipalities and the funding that they're provided. Minister of the Day, Municipal Community Affairs, Honourable Alfred Moses, advised the 18th Assembly that the gap was approximately $39 million. In 2016, the mandate N.W.T. committed developing a strategy to close funding gap over the next 9 years. The Standing Committee of Operations and expressed concerns accumulated impact funding shortfall communities on a year-by-year basis. The committee repeatedly asked for annual shortfall was to no avail. Committee asked the gap to be updated in an annual to see what the progress was being made to reduce. The committee pushed the minister to strategy to close the gap. To report the funding gap, it was quietly tabled in the last sitting day of the 18th Assembly, making it impossible for the 18th Assembly Standing Committee to review the department's work. I've had a chance to read the report. The findings, Mr. Speaker, are shocking. The report says, in quote, the total annual funding deficit for community governments is approximately $24,500,000. This takes account the $29 million provided annually through MACA's public infrastructure policy and $16 million provided annually through the federal government's gas tax agreement. This is a lot worse than the $40 million deficit over the 9 years, and I'm encouraging my colleagues on the government operations to review this report in detail. Mr. Speaker, community governments are the heart and soul of our communities. They work, and this work affects the lives of every resident in the Northwest Territories. The N.W.T. has to stop offloading the responsibility on the community governments and recognize how vital we have to be working with them and fund them properly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Nuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to discuss oral health care in the N.W.T, especially for communities outside of the capital. In my community, we have a dental clinic that serves not only Inuvik, but the Beaufort Delta, and that's not enough. I would like to refer to an oral health action plan released by Inuit Taprit Kanatami ITK in 2013, and I quote from the executive summary. 2008-2009 Inuit Oral Health Survey highlighted the need for urgent and comprehensive measures to overcome the unacceptably high rate of oral disease, that it is 2 to 3 times that of the rest of Canada. Mr. Speaker, in the N.W.T, there is an oral health action plan that was created, and it's a 3-year action plan from 2018 to 2021. The minister at the time wrote in the minister message in that action plan, "We know that good oral health is an essential element of our overall health. We know that healthy mouths in children are crucial for adequate nutrition, growth, language development, school performance, and social well-being. Yet dental caries is the most common chronic infectious disease of childhood and places substantial burden on our population." Mr. Speaker, in the same document, the introduction part of the plan states, "Oral health, an essential component of overall health. Oral health is an important element of our general health. Healthy mouths and teeth in children promote healthy growth, nutrition, speech, language development, good school performance, and social well-being. Sadly, chronic pain and tooth loss from untreated oral disease can impair a child's ability to eat, speak, sleep, and learn. In adults, oral disease has been linked to an array of chronic and systemic diseases, such as diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, and pneumonia. We all know this, yet we are still failing to provide equitable dental service in our communities. Instead of prevention, we continue to arrange medical travel for surgery for essential dental work in our children, Mr. Speaker. Dental therapists used to be able to work in the communities to do this work, but since closing the last dental therapist school in November 2011 in Canada, there are few left. Mr. Speaker, we can't unknow what we know. So what is this government going to do about it? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tourism has been a bright light in the N.W.T economy, experiencing growth other sectors can only dream of. The number of people who are visiting the N.W.T and the amount of money they spend here is significant. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to review a few numbers from industry, tourism, and investment. In 2018-19, we had just over 120,000 visitors come to the N.W.T, and together they spent $210 million. Of that total, we had about 42,000 Aurora visitors, and together they spent $67.7 million. These are large numbers. Mr. Speaker, almost 16% of visitors last year came from China, a 19-fold increase in 6 years. Some Aurora tour operators reported having their best December ever and looked forward to a great record number of visitors in the new year. Then the coronavirus struck, and the Chinese government shut down group travel to reduce the spread of the virus. Where does that leave the Aurora tourism industry in the N.W.T? Media reported at the end of January that the company Aurora Holiday had more than 200 cancellations for hotels, rental cars, and day tours following the Chinese government's decision. These cancellations represented half of their bookings through the busy winter period. And that's just one of many licensed tourism operators. And those numbers are for direct spending. There will be impacts for indirect and induced spending as well. It seems likely that small business, especially those based in Yellowknife, will take a hit on that $67.7 million spent by Aurora visitors last year. As someone who lives and works in Yellowknife, I notice a difference. There are fewer groups touring here at the Legislative Assembly. There are fewer groups walking in downtown and walking down the hill to Old Town. It's clear to me that once the coronavirus crisis is resolved N.W.T. tourism will have some rebuilding to do, re-establishing markets, reassuring Chinese visitors they are welcome, and assisting tourism small businesses to rebuild. I want to see this as a priority investment by government, given the importance of tourism to our economy. I will have questions for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife Centre. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. A number of agreements were signed to formally establish Thai Dene Nene as a national park and protected area under N.W.T. legislation in August of 2019. This was a monumental achievement in terms of building a conservation economy and very important for the community of Little Cay that spent decades negotiating this area. While our government attended the signing ceremony, there was no news release, not even a minister's statement. Quite frankly, N.W.T. had to be dragged into the arrangement and resisted it at almost every step. This despite the Visitor Operations and Heritage Centre that will be built in Little Cay, creating initial direct employment estimated at 18 positions, including 8 full-time jobs. Canada will invest $40 million towards infrastructure in the National Park Reserve operations in the first 12 years and $3.4 million annually for operations thereafter. Canada has even committed to invest $7.9 million towards the establishment and operation of the N.W.T. portion of Thai Dene Nene. N.W.T. has only committed to spend $290,000 annually for the management of its portion of the protected area. I was on the Environment and Natural Resources website recently and could not find an actual public registry as required under the Protected Areas Act. That's where I'd hoped to find up-to-date information on the progress towards full establishment and implementation of Thai Dene Nene. There is no public registry, and the information about Thai Dene Nene does not appear to have been updated since this last summer. I could find a regulation setting out the boundaries of the N.W.T. protected area, that is a portion of Thai Dene Nene, but no regulation for an establishment agreement and nothing about the Wildlife Act to establish the conservation area that is going to be part of Thai Dene Nene as well. I'll have questions later today for the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources about this government's commitments to building a conservation economy and fulfilling its obligations with regard to Thai Dene Nene and the Protected Areas Act as a whole. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Tunade-Willade.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I want to talk about elders aging in place with dignity. And I know I sound a little bit like a broken record, but I'm going to keep on with this. I spoke about this issue last night and last week, but I want to take this opportunity to touch on the issue of mobility problems not being addressed for elders. One of our 22 mandate items is to enable seniors to age in place with dignity. Mr. Speaker, the treatment I've seen from this government towards our elders is unacceptable and undignified. I sincerely hope that all our government departments start treating elders to a much higher standard from how they've been treated so far. I know we as a government can do better for them. And when I say that, I'm not just addressing any one department, I'm saying it to the government as a whole. Mr. Speaker, I was raised to hold our elders to a very high standard. They are our knowledge keepers, our trusted advisors, so they deserve utmost respect and top quality treatment for whatever their needs may be. Mr. Speaker, my intent with this member statement is not to put any blame onto any particular department, but rather try and point out and root out the pervading systemic treatment that elders have been receiving over the years by our government. I'm sensing a strong sentiment from our department that this is the way things have always been done. And therefore we must accept it and move on. And there's got to be a better way of doing business. However, Mr. Speaker, this is an issue that I refuse to simply accept and move on from. So just consider this image for one moment, Mr. Speaker, of an elder who is wheelchair bound, and each and every time he or she wants to enter or exit their own home, they have to have assistance to move up and down their stairs just to get some fresh air or to go visit. And they have to be picked up and physically carried in a wheelchair. And I want you to think about that for a moment. And just think that if your family member or friend had experienced that day in and day out, and in my humble opinion, Mr. Speaker, this is highly undignified and this should be remedied immediately. Mr. Speaker, in cases like these, we should be prioritizing the immediate needs of our constituent so they at least can enter and exit their home without any burden or worry. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to continue my statement.
Thank you, member for Tunde-Welliday. The member is seeking unanimous consent to conclude a statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Mr. Speaker. And continuing on, Mr. Speaker, if we truly support independent living for all elders, then let's show it. Let's start making our elders' homes more accessible for things like wheelchair chairs for their bathrooms, to make it more friendly to use and easily to use. If there is bureaucratic red tape from preventing this from moving forward, then it's time to start cutting some of the red tape and allow the elders to receive the best service available and to meet their needs. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Tunde-Welliday. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Cam Lake.
Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T employs over 5,000 capable, hardworking Northerners who provide programs and services to over 44,000 residents. I believe the majority of public servants are passionate about the work they do and want to be as effective as possible. It's therefore concerning to hear of frustrations that come from working within the N.W.T's siloed structure. The constraints of these silos are preventing the public service from making the most of what it has to offer. Matrix organizations are workplaces that cut through silos, incorporating diverse talents and perspectives to solve tough problems. They are created when urgent problems require all hands on deck. Matrix organizations work both laterally and up and down. People are empowered to make things happen. Functional expertise and administrative accountability are serving the same ends, and leadership arises from all levels, and everyone has a role in success. Changing our workplace culture to empower creative teams is hard, but the N.W.T is making gains that we need to celebrate. Mr. Speaker, the Integrative Case Management Team is a proactive matrix team run by Justice, Health and Social Services, Housing and Education, Culture and Employment. The program provides wraparound support to some of our most vulnerable. It acknowledges that not all people start from the same place and not every person requires the same supports. Over the course of its pilot term, Integrated Case Management received 426 program referrals. This program employs pathfinders who connect Yellowknifers to a network of supports, building their capacity and confidence to access government. Cross-functional integrated teams can be more flexible, more creative, and more effective. Most importantly, they learn from both their successes and their failures, but they need room to fail fast and move forward faster. Our social and environmental problems are unique. Cookie-cutter solutions won't work. Much of what we need to do has little precedent, and integrated matrix teams need to be mandated and given the latitude to succeed. Mr. Speaker, there are challenges associated with moving from a siloed to a matrix style of organization. Ministerial authority as established in legislation can be rigid, and legislation and policies will be required to support a matrix structure. I am pleased to see the progress the N.W.T has been making. The Deputy Ministerial Committee structure sets up across cross-departmental working groups to ensure that N.W.T departments are not working at cross purposes with one another. In the last Assembly, the ATIP Act was amended to permit the collection and disclosure of information to deliver common and integrated programs and services. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to continue.
Thank you, member for Cam Lake. The member is seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I'm not clear on is whether these initiatives are happy accidents or whether they represent a commitment by the N.W.T to move to a more matrix-style organization. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Cam Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Decho.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my member statement today is on fuel tank farms. I believe they sprouted up in the early years, possibly in the 60s. There were private tank farms and there were government-run tank farms. And I believe at that time there were possibly no rigid regulations as to the setup and the installation of the tank farms, nor ongoing inspections. I understand no tank farm, whether they be N.W.T or private, are grandfathered from the early years. In most instances, there are known fuel spills or leakages from the tanks, and those are damaging the environment in those areas, especially in the private ones. They're run by private businesses, because I understand that we don't have inspectors going onto those lands, but I believe we're regulating tank farm installations. And at the appropriate time, I'll have questions for the Minister of Infrastructure. Merci.
Thank you, Member for Ditcho. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to build on the statement given by my colleague from Cam Lake. There have been many successes of the integrated case management approach, many individual successes, but ultimately those pathfinders are trying to run a person-centered method of helping people in a system-centered institution. Mr. Speaker, I believe the writing is on the wall with the upcoming evaluation of the integrated case management project. What will happen is that unit will have discovered many barriers to systemic change. It will have many successes for people with complex needs, yet they are not empowered to bring about the regulatory, the policy, and the legislative changes required. That is our job in this House. And Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that these solutions are that complex. They require frontline workers making yes the default answer. They require our frontline workers having flexibility to interpret policies that when a person with complex needs is in front of them, they can allow the policy to work for that person. They require our departments to talk to each other and create case files for individuals with complex needs. They require our departments to email each other on the front lines. Mr. Speaker, right now when we want to make policy changes, we have to go up all the way the chain and then all the way back down. And what was actually should have been an easy policy shift that happened when the complex need individual was in front of them takes months. Mr. Speaker, we need to make housing and income support talk to each other better. We need to extend the time period that a person can be on income assistance so they're not struggling with monthly reporting on fear of eviction and complex health needs all at the same time. Mr. Speaker, I believe our integrated case management unit has discovered many of the systemic problems in this GNWT. I believe they have the solutions. The questions now are they going to be empowered to bring about the systemic change and break down the silos in our government? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will have questions for the Minister of Justice on integrated case management.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if he's here right now, but earlier in our session, my constituent and well-known photographer Pat Kane was in the gallery. I'd like to welcome him to the Legislative Assembly. Merci.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife Centre. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgments. Acknowledgments. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions for the Minister and Minister of Community Affairs. In the report that the 19th or 18th Assembly did, I'm wondering if the Minister read the report. As the Minister, former Minister says, the MACA report, Minister's quote, I want to acknowledge that we're unable to definitely answer when the funding gap would be closed in regards to the local community governments because the shortfall's there and people, communities are struggling. Does the Minister have any comments to this, Mr. Speaker? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I realize that the funding gap is, you feel it very strongly at the community levels. And coming from a smaller community, I realize that a lot of the funding, the government funding that we provide at that community level is, you could feel the cutbacks, it's drastic. Going forward, we are looking at solutions to try to work within our department and work with the department to access federal funding and for them to I don't want to elaborate on it too much because we are in discussions about this and how we are going to be working to fulfill this, and we do have our budgets and our mandates that are just fairly new. So then discussions are happening with the department, and I want to I'll follow up with the member by email, or I'll be speaking to him because it's a very sensitive topic, and I just want to make sure that what I would, once our department has reviewed what we have, that I'm displaying it for the whole of the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. MACA's own business plan has the acknowledgement that, quote, if the department remains unable to provide adequate core funding to the community governments, the consequences could include the inability for the community government to adequately deliver core services and to maintain capital assets. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I have the member repeat his question? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, MACA's own business plan has to acknowledge that, I quote, if the department remains unable to provide adequate funding to the community governments, the consequences could include the inability of the community government to adequately deliver core services to maintain capital assets. Is this government prepared to take the risk in having tainted water scandal or catastrophic event to result in chronic municipal underfunding of the community governments? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While new funding is important, reducing the municipal funding gap, this mandate item is about more than just new funding. MAC is also looking at actions that can be taken to mitigate expenditures or provide additional opportunity for own source revenue. For an example, the department intends to work with the Department of Environmental and Natural Resources to support implementation of the N.W.T waste management strategy. This strategy includes actions to support training and develop to support waste site operators identifying funding to remove bulky and hazardous waste from landfill sites. In order to extend the lifespan of the existing solid waste sites and working with the regional land and water boards to support tools which will assist community governments in managing their solid waste site in accordance with their water license. The activities should improve on local waste management practices, but allow the government to support some of the costs to contribute to the community government. Furthermore, MAC is working with the Department of Lands to develop and implement a process for the transfer of vacant commissioners' lands to the community governments, which will take on authority and responsibility for land administration and provide potential own source revenue for the sale of some land. The process will include such things as developing and implementing land administration training through MACA's School of Community Government to give community governments skills in land administration. I want the member to know that I'm very mindful of the funding gap that does exist in the effect that you feel it in the smaller communities. But I also want the member to be mindful that the departments are funded, and they do have to come up with their own capital plan and their budget of how they're going to be spending their money going forward, and that MACA is very open to what projects that they're going to foresee, and that we are there to support them through the process, and we will be working very closely with the community governments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
That's a lot of good news for a question I did not ask. I was talking, but I'm thankful for the minister. Thank you so much. That's good news for me. Core funding, Mr. Speaker, that's what I was talking about. It's not the new funding. The new funding, the department, you know, our community governments are struggling because we're getting less and less. It's not so much less and less, it's the cost of doing business in the community, right? So the community, like I sat on council for 3 years, we struggle, we stretch everything, Mr. Speaker. Core funding. Has the department presented its findings to the N.W.T. Association of Communities? If not, Mr. Speaker, when does it plan to do so, to work with our community association to try to bring that funding gap closed, and so that we could properly allocate or properly fund our local community governments who provide services to the whole Northwest Territories? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My response to the member was to give him some insight of what MACA is actually potentially forecasting in order to come up and work with that municipal gap that we do have. We are trying to work with the community to look at other solutions of how they can collect revenue at their municipal level. And also looking at, we're very mindful of working with the solid waste sites, the water stations, and making sure that we do have the quality of service and the safety of each of the communities. In the communities, they are entitled to be working and going towards accessing additional federal funding. Some of the communities in the Northwest Territories have accessed the federal funding and have been able to pursue projects in regards to climate change and in regards to transportation as well too, with the help of and the support of Municipal and Community Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake. Okay. Final supplementary. Make it short there. Member for N.W.T.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has a new mandate purpose to provide communities and opportunities in their additional revenue to offset the cost of delivering the core programs. How realistic is the N.W.T. to do that, Mr. Speaker? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs, I would not like to see the offset of forecasting of programs. I want to find solutions in the community and with the federal government, and how we can work to not have any financial breaks for the communities. And also going forward, I would really like to express and really emphasize to the member that we are working as a department and wanting to find solutions on how we can work with that gap. But also I really want the member to be mindful that safety is number one. I'm looking at water and sewer to making sure that our communities are, we don't have those issues going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My questions are for the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources, responsible for protected areas, including Thai-Dene-Nene. The Protected Areas Act was brought into force on June 20th, 2019, over 7 months ago, and there is still no public registry as required under this legislation. Can the Minister explain why there's no public registry and when one will finally be established? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Protected Area Registry has been available on the ENR website since June 2019, as the member said. It includes all the material currently required under the Protected Area Act. As a management board are established for the new Indigenous and territorial protected areas, additional information will be posted on the registry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that, and I would suggest that he actually look at the so-called public registry. The Act itself requires about 18 different kinds of information to be posted. The establishment agreements for Thai-Dene are not found there. So, you know, a better model is look at the Mackenzie Valley Land and Water Board or the Review Board's public registries. Happy to talk to the Minister or the staff about this, but that's not a public registry, and I don't think it even meets the basic minimum requirements in the legislation. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I want to go on to my question. While Thai-Dene, there's the regulations out to establish the boundaries. There's no regulation that sets out an establishment agreement or management in any way. Can the Minister tell us if there is an establishment agreement and when it will be set out in regulation? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm more than willing to meet with the member and look at this because we're trying to do what's best for all the residents of the Northwest Territories. On to his question, Thai-Dene Territorial Protected Area was established in 2019 through regulations under the Protected Areas Act. There was not enough time during the 18th Assembly to complete all the regulations. Work is underway on drafting complete regulations and expect to be completed by 2021 as agreed in the established agreement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. I'm not sure what agreements were signed in August of last year to establish this, but presumably one of them should be at least posted to our public registry, but want to move on. So part of Thai-Dene is an area to be set aside and established as a wildlife conservation area under the Wildlife Act. Can the Minister tell us whether the wildlife conservation area will include a permanent subsurface and subsurface land withdrawal, and when will the area be established by regulation? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the surface and subsurface rights for Thai-Dene Wildlife Conservation Area were withdrawn on April 1st, 2019. Thai-Dene Wildlife Conservation Area lands withdrawal is not intended to be permanent and could be removed when there is an approved land use plan when the land claims are settled. Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T aims to establish the Thai-Dene Wildlife Conservation Area under the Wildlife Act and regulations by February 2021.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. And I want to thank the Minister for that. I think there might be a little bit of a misunderstanding here. My understanding is that the wildlife conservation area is going to be permanently protected and that the surface, subsurface is not going to be open for exploration. So I'll be very curious to follow this along because I don't think that's what the Minister said. But earlier today I said that the only public commitment of N.W.T funding towards Thai-Dene seems to be an annual appropriation of $290,000. The federal government has even committed to fund some of our costs. Can the Minister tell us what specific capital and operations funding has our government committed towards Thai-Dene moving forward in the future? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the previous question, I'll be willing to sit down with the Minister and the Department to look at that thing there. But to answer his question, Environmental and Climate Change Canada Natural Funding has provided $5.8 million over 3 years for the Thai-Dene Territorial protected areas. In addition, Parks Canada is providing $1 million in funding over the same 3-year period. The Government of Northwest Territories is committing $8.12 million of in-kind funding to the 3 protected areas identified under the Nature Fund. This in-kind funding is made of operation, maintenance, and salaries. The GNWT is exploring operations to ensure stable funding beyond 2023 for the territorial protected areas, including an endowment fund and other natural-based funding sources. And when I said the thing, I apologize to the protected areas, so I'll be more than willing to sit down with the member. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Nuvik-Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions today are going to be for the Minister of Health and Social Services in regards to the oral health action plan that I mentioned in my statement, or in my member statement. In the action plan, I see a lot of it is generated around changing community health nurse standards, community health nurse guidelines, prenatal, postnatal. What I want to ask the minister is, knowing we have a shortage, and I know we have some really excellent community health nurses, but a lot of times with the shortage, we don't have community health nurses. We have a lot of emergency room nurses going into the health centers. So with all these changes that are in here, how do we expect these nurses to make sure that they're providing this oral health care when that's not their background? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Nuvik-Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member brings up a good point. I mean, you know, it's very important that, and I just want the members to know that the dental services are not an insured service and are provided privately by dentists. The Non-Insured Health Benefits, or NIHB, provides funding to bring dental services to smaller communities where there are no dental clinics. The member's talking about the N.W.T. Oral Health Action Plan and some of the results as a part of the action plan, and I can look into what the member's asking. I don't know at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Nuvik-Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand who provides care, and I understand that dental services is not an insured service, but like I said in my member statement, it affects so many insured services, and we do provide health promotion, and according to the action plan, a lot of that is health promotion, and our frontline nurses do provide a lot of that. In the action plan, there is new oral health positions using a phased-in approach in the first year 2018-19, second year 2019-20, and a third year 2021. Where of those positions, have those positions been created, and where are they so far? Right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nuvik-Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know the exact details. However, I do know that we added 1 registered dental hygienist in Norman Wells, and we're currently investing in $974,000 in upgrading dental equipment across the territory. Otherwise, I don't know exactly where these positions are. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Nuvik-Twin Lakes.
All right, referring back again to the action plan, it also says it's going to establish a chief oral health officer role. Like in all the reports, we know this is such a crisis in all Inuit, First Nations, Métis, in the territories. It's a crisis. Mr. Speaker, you're coming from a small town. You know the services are lacking. Is this position currently being is there a job description, and are we currently recruiting for a chief oral health officer role? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Nuvik-Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I don't know at this time, but it's something I will look into and get back to the member. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Nuvik-Twin Lakes.
One of the things that I would really like to know is how does the minister, like, how does she see the health centers providing oral health care as the nurses when, because it's in here. Although they're not dentists, they're supposed to do the primary stuff, but on top of everything else that they do. So I just want to know, how does she expect them to get everything that they have to do in their day on top of all of this? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nivik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, very difficult questions. Again, I'm not sure at this time. However, we are rolling out and expanding on prevention services and updating dental equipment in the dental rooms, both in the schools and in the health centers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Decho.
Mr. Speaker. I just needed to make a correction to my member statement that my questions will be directed to the Minister of E&R. I just want to use my community as a brief example here. We're right on the banks of the Mackenzie River, and we have many gas bars and tank farms along the river system in close proximity to the river. And of course, we've got regulations for protection of the water, since water is life. My question to the minister is, are there any regulations for fuel tank farms?
Thank you, Member for Decho. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Short answer, yes, there's regulations. Over a certain size, it's through, the tank has to be registered with Environment Canada and Climate Change, and if it's under that, there's regulations with the Department of E&R. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Decho.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for that answer. Are there any requirements and any regulations for yearly inspections on fuel tank farms?
Thank you, Member for Decho. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are regulations. Again, it's up to the owners to make sure that they follow it. If it's part of the government, our infrastructure, we follow regulations that there's out there with part of Canada and with the ENR. So there's regulations, and it is available through our wildlife officers, our offices in the community, which you can access them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Decho.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Speaker. It's odd that we're not regulating private businesses with their tank farms, because he's just stated that they only regulate the government-owned ones. So we're not regulating the private tank farms that are, in close proximity to the river, to the waterways. I don't know why are we even here? We're the government. We got to set these regulations even for private operators. I'm wondering if the minister can advise when we may see updated regulations to all tank farms, whether they're private or government-owned.
Thank you, Member for Decho. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I guess I should make it clear, whether it's government or private industry, we do have regulations and we need to follow them. My understanding is that the federal storage tank regulations were developed in 2012, and we follow those moving forward. So we do have regulations, we do inspect them, but people need to if they have concerns, they need to reach out to our inspectors so we can check on these things. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Decho.
Mr. Speaker. Yeah, thanks for that answer there. Still, I don't see no commitments or any actions as to inspections of any of the tank farms. I don't hear that in these answers. It's just whenever, whenever somebody says something. We should have regulations in place that provide these services by the N.W.T on a regular yearly basis, or whenever, and it should be spelled out in any regulations before they do any further installations. I'd like to ask the Minister when we can see actual inspections of all tank farms in the very, very near future. Masi.
Thank you, Member for Decho. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to make a commitment to say we're going to do inspections because that's part of the job that we do. Right now, what we've done is we make sure if there's leaks, when it's installed properly, we follow the federal regulations. Our staff is out there. Again, the important things is, I heard the member talk in his member statement, there's potential sites out there that are a problem. We just need to be told of that so we can work on those things, so we can identify them. Again, it's about working together, and even if it's on private land, if there is a potential spill or a situation, please reach out to us so we can do the inspection. And people can phone, there's a 1-800 number, there's a spill line, reach out to it, it's anonymous, and we can work on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier today, I spoke about integrated case management. My question is for the Minister of Justice. I understand there is a program evaluation of the integrated case management pilot project. When will that be completed, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's been already an initial program review that was conducted in 2017. I believe that should already be available. But more recently, there's been a second item that's been, or a second report that's been done. It's a social return on investment analysis, and this has been completed. I think the final touches are being put on the report right now. I am hopeful to have it to the integrated case management partner departments by the end of this month, and out to the public and to the House thereafter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to receiving that report. One of my concerns is that during the 2017 evaluation, the Integrated Case Management Unit raised the issue that they've had many person-centered successes, but they have not had successes with the other half of the program, which is to change larger system services. In this report that the Minister of Justice has referred to, will there be recommendations for changes to legislation and policy in all of the departments the Integrated Case Management works with? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the more recent report, the one that we're just waiting on now, we have specifically asked the research contractors to provide recommendations that would help remove the barriers to improve person-centered services for everyone, not only those accessing the program specifically, but for everyone accessing these services more generally. And then with respect to taking those recommendations and considering whether that will translate to policy or legislative change, I expect that to be a process that will take more time and will involve all of Cabinet, and for certainly will involve all the ministers involved with ICM. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to seeing those recommendations, and hopefully we can get some of the knowledge that the integrated case management has gained to actually gain traction in the larger systemic changes. My understanding of this project is that it dates back to about 2014, and it ran till the 2020 program evaluation as a pilot project, and then we ran it again as a pilot project, which is just coming to an end. Can the minister provide what the future of the integrated case management pilot project is? Is it going to become a program? Where are we at with that? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the program is ongoing right now. The program as it's constituted right now, runs to the end of this fiscal year, and I'm sure the members are aware we're about to go into a process of considering budgets for the upcoming fiscal year, and integrated case management will be considered as part of that process along with everything else. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions today about matrix organizations are for the Honourable Premier. My first question is, has Cabinet made a deliberate decision to move toward a matrix-style organization structure for the GNWT? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So Cabinet is, we haven't made a conscious decision that says we're going to have a matrix style of organization structure as such, but we have discussed the issues of the integrated service delivery. One of the guiding principles that we actually tabled in the House here in December 10th, 2019 says we will evaluate, develop and deliver programs and services using an integrated, client-focused and solution-focused approach. People should not have to go to 6 different agencies, 6 different departments to actually get services. It is not okay. Sometimes the stories that people have to share are horrible, and it's not okay to have to keep bringing them up all the time. So we recognize that. I only take credit for what we've done. I know that in the 18th Legislative Assembly, this was a priority as well. I can't say about the 17th, I wasn't part of that one, but in the 18th, I know that the previous Premier, we had a number of different departments that have working groups that work across departments. We have deputy ministers, groups that take different issues, and our own committee of cabinet had different committees that looked at all different ministers sit within an integrated approach that is being carried forward into this government. So again, we don't have anything that's structured, that's written down, that's organizational at this point. We're challenging our departments, and we're just forming, and all ministers will be taking part in overseeing what's going on in departments. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Premier be able to speak to any planning underway right now for any other types of initiatives in the style of the Integrated Case Management Program? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as I stated earlier, at this time we're just kind of new into the area. We do recognize the importance of working together. Again, I'll use an example that was used here tonight on how departments do already work together. We had a minister stand up and said that Municipal and Community Affairs and ENR are working together on waste management. So that does show how departments are. We recognize they're interconnected, that you can't do things in silo until we're trying to work better towards making sure that all the aspects are covered. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that response. Has the GNWT undertaken any type of global research or analysis to determine how other programs or services could be delivered in the collaborative style of the integrated case management, or are initiatives of this nature left to individual departments to propose and to plan and to then go out and try to set up those initiatives together? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So again, another example of how we work together and almost working together on the other side. I mean, the previous questions were about integrated case management. It kind of falls in inappropriately to this question again. So when we were doing the integrated case management, there was a lot of research done on it. The previous government again started this. They looked at models such as the New Brunswick framework on the delivery of integrated services for children and youth, as well as models in New Zealand. There are important lessons to be learned from other jurisdictions. It's the best practice says is you don't always keep reinventing the wheel. You look at the wheel that's there and make sure it doesn't need any repairs. So that has been done. Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Final supplementary. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Premier be willing to commit to doing a study of the GNWT to see what programs we can bring together to allow us to better serve our clients across the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as I just stated in the last question, we've done quite a bit of research cross-jurisdictional for our integrated service integrated service delivery. So at this point, I don't think. I mean, we can do research for the sake of research. We can do studies for the sake of studies and plans for the sake of plans. However, we've done this research. We have the program running. It's just being evaluated now. I would suggest honorably that we hold back for a minute on doing more research and see what the evaluations come out with first. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment. Aurora tourism is a major component of the N.W.T. tourism industry, and Chinese tourists accounted for about 20% of all the tourists who came to the N.W.T. last year. Last month, the Chinese government suspended group tours because of the risk of spreading the coronavirus. My question is, does the minister have any information on the impact of the coronavirus shutdown on N.W.T. tourism? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife Centre. Minister responsible for industry, tourism and investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We do know that there will be impacts as a result of the coronavirus. However, at this time, we don't have those numbers in front of us, and we don't feel like we'll really have the full picture until likely around the fall of this year, when we can look at the numbers for the season and see where we're at. would like to remind that while we do have a lot of Chinese visitors, and they do play an important role in our tourism sector, we do have people coming from other locations around the world. So while this will impact our tourism sector and we will feel the impact, we still feel we'll have a robust, vibrant tourism season. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that answer. Without data, I'm not sure how the Minister can assure us that tourism will be vibrant and that there will be impacts. So my specific question on this is, what kind of data is collected on where Aurora tourism dollars are spent, say by community, and on what kinds of products? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife Centre. Minister of ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fair enough. I may be a little bit optimistic in using the words vibrant, and I acknowledge that. I would like to hope that we will continue to see a good season. However, I do acknowledge what the member is saying, and that there is no way I can predict that at this time. Again, I also cannot fully answer what metrics will be collected. Obviously, we will be looking at things like direct impacts to airfare, cancellations on airlines. We'll be looking at asking the hotels, etc., to provide numbers for their types of cancellations and such. So I assume that there will be a fairly robust data collection. I'm committed to sharing that with the member when I get that information going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that answer. I would like the Minister to go beyond assuming that there will be robust data collection and order robust data collection. And further, how can the government improve the timeliness of the reporting? Fall is a long, long time from now, to assist tourism marketing and planning efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife Centre. Minister of ITI.
Mr. Speaker, let me just clarify my point then. While I've said that I didn't feel like we would have a great or a full understanding of the entire impacts till the fall, I'm sure that we will be apprising the public and the members. We will be, I'll commit to that, prior to the fall. As we start to collect the data and we can analyze it and look, we will commit to updating the members as we progress through that data analyses, and I will commit to it being a robust data collection. As an engineer, I love data, so I will commit to that to the member. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the Minister's commitment on that. The point about early and diverse data collection is to assist tourism marketing and planning efforts, which are obviously essential to shoring up our industry. My final question is, what efforts will the Minister make to re-establish Chinese markets, assure Chinese visitors they are welcome, and assist small businesses that may be impacted by the cancellations caused by the coronavirus outbreak. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife Centre. Minister responsible for environment and industry, tourism and investment. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have enough on my plate without ENR. So yes, thank you. It is my understanding that Northwest Territories Tourism is actually continuing. They are a destination marketing organization, that they're actually at this point continuing to market to China, as not the entire country of China has been impacted by this. So it is our plan to continue on with marketing towards China and Chinese tourists as well. We will work with the Chinese tourism counterparts to ensure that we can communicate with them that we want them to come to the Northwest Territories. We're still committed to them as a marketplace for our tourism products, and we will work closely with them and help to facilitate the exchange of information between the two countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Written questions. Written questions. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. In September 2017, the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation released a 3-year action plan with the title Towards Level Ground, addressing persistent core need in the Northwest Territories. This plan responded to a 2016 motion supported by regular members that called for a comprehensive and fully costed plan to reduce housing problems identified in the 2014 community survey. Can the Minister please provide a report on the actions taken during the first 2 years of the action plan, that's 2017-18 and 2018-19, including how many households the Housing Corporation assisted and a breakdown of the type of assistance by action and/or initiative as detailed on page 11 of the action plan, a breakdown of money spent on each of these actions and/or initiatives by fiscal year, a projection of assistance by action or initiative as detailed on page 11 of the action plan, along with the breakdown of money spent on each one for the last fiscal year, and a projection of how federal money under the National Housing Strategy will assist in meeting these measures in the current fiscal year. Thank you.
Member for Yellowknife Centre. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's address. Replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Member or Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document: interactivity transfers exceeding $250,000 from April 1st to December 31st, 2019. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Motions. Motions. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the motion that I gave notice of previously to allow us to take next week off to allow members to return to their constituencies. I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that notwithstanding Rule 4, when this House adjourns on February 13th, 2020, it shall be adjourned until Tuesday, February 25th, 2020. And further, that at any time prior to February 25th, 2020, if the Speaker is satisfied, after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly, that the public interest requires that the House should meet at an earlier time during the adjournment, the Speaker may give notice, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time stated in such notice and shall transact its business as it has been duly adjourned to that time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. The motion is in order and is non-debatable. All those in favour? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Motions. Motions. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters. Table document 12-19 brackets 2 and table document 17-19 brackets 2 with member for Nunavut Twin Lakes in the chair.
All right. I now call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Mr. Norn?
Marcy Cho, Madam Chair. I would like to move that the chair rise and report progress.
Okay. There is a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
Can I have the report of the Committee of the Whole member for Nunavut Twin Lakes?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, your committee would like to report progress, and Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Nunavut Twin Lakes. Motion is in order. Do I have a seconder? Member for Great Slave. All those in favor? She did. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Madam Clerk, orders of the day.
Indaidze edani legedi ha wekayati. Nakedze sadat kwaza nano stilai. Nakeleme nano. Hayat eti awode hayati.
Number 5, recognition of visitors in the gallery. Number 6, acknowledgement. 7, oral question. 8, written questions. Number 9, return to written questions. Number 10, replies to Commissioner's address. 11, petition. 12, report of committees on the review of bills. 13, report of standing and special committee. 14, table of documents. 15, notice of motion. 16, motions. 17, notice of motions for first reading of bills. 18, first reading of bills. 19, second reading of bills. 20, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters. 21, report of committee of the whole. 22, third reading of bills. 23, orders of the day.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Tuesday, February 25th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m.